Well, thank you very much for joining me this evening. My name is Alex Peck, and I am Loyola's dedicated LexisNexis representative. I'm actually very excited to bring this session to you because I think that this is one of those things that we don't spend enough time learning about unless we seek it out in law school. I know that we're coming up on about having to give our first oral argument, and I remember the terror. I remember being scared. I remember thinking, hey, I think I have some good skills here, but I don't know how to translate them from debate that I did or speech that I did in high school to doing an oral argument. So what are the steps that I need to take? So what I want to do is I first want to start with a little bit about myself, because I think that that's a really good place to start. So you can kind of know that at least I do have some really good experience in this. Not only am I your dedicated LexisNexis rep, but I did moot court extensively in my time at IU Indianapolis. I was the runner-up, myself and my partner, at the Staten Moot Court competition at IU McKinney. And then I also worked on the Moot Court Executive Board the next year, designing the competition for the next slate of students, including also judging quite frequently in that competition. I've judged the Chicago CBA moot court competition. I've helped judge teams that are competing nationally. And then my last year at McKinney, I was also a quarterfinalist in the National Environmental Moot Court Competition in White Plains, New York. So I do have quite a bit of experience here. This is kind of my area of expertise, if you will, also environmental law and environmental law issues. But I'm really excited to bring this session to you because I think that starting out and really breaking this down into these 4 steps and talking about some of the things that we need to do in each step, it's going to really maybe take some of the pressure off preparing and getting ready for this oral argument. So the first step that I want to talk about is prepping your argument. So things to think about as you're translating your brief, right? Your brief from a written piece of work to a piece of work that you're going to be delivering, right? How to take those persuasive sections that you've written and really create persuasive moments in your argument that are going to stand out. We're then going to talk about some things that deal with practicing your argument. So steps you should take when you begin to practice and get ready for this. Some of you may never do moot court, right? Maybe you're going to be a transactional attorney and you're not going to have any moot court experience. Others, you might want to do the moot court competition. You might want to compete nationally. Regardless of what you're wanting to do, practicing these skills is going to help you, right? Developing these skills as you practice is going to help you regardless of what you do in law school. Then we're going to talk about perfecting your argument. So doing the practice steps enough to get to that space and that phase where we're actually perfecting. We're honing our craft, we're honing our argument and being the best advocates that we can. And then finally, presenting. Things to think about day of. Things that you should be aware of as you go into the room, do's, don'ts, things that I think are really helpful. So let's start with prepping your argument. First thing that I want to mention that's probably the most important thing, and as if you're in this session, you're already doing it, which is learning from others. Oral arguments and prepping and creating and drafting these oral arguments. This is something that's been done thousands, if not hundreds of thousands or millions of times by people all across the country and across the world. There are so many great resources out there, specifically that walk through each step, including starting with a brief that you've written and then taking that brief and translating it into an oral argument. I actually have a PDF that I'm going to include in an email to you after this course, and it's also going to be on the YouTube video link in the description that you should take a look at, review, and actually go through some of these links and see some of the advice that's given about translating that from a brief into an oral argument. The next thing that I really recommend is listening to others. And that sounds like I'm saying learn, right? It's the sort of same thing. It's actually different. What I'm advocating that you do is actually listen. Listen to some Supreme Court arguments. All of these Supreme Court arguments going back, I think, close to 30 to 40 years are available on oye.com for you to actually listen to some of the nation's top advocates speak in front of the nation's top judges and jurists, right? So you can get really good experience about not only how do people speak, right? What's the kind of decorum that you hear, but you can also hear what are some of the kinds of questions that these attorneys are being asked. And even more crucially, how are they responding, right? Responding, getting those questions and responding. We'll talk about that in a minute. That's the dreaded part of this for so many people. But once we listen to a few people present, we can also understand that it's not as scary as we think. And it really is almost like responding to somebody in a conversation where you're having an argument about the First Amendment or what have you in the cafeteria over lunch, right? It's about how do we craft our response. The Seventh Circuit also has a list of oral arguments as well. I've included that in the PDF. Another great resource to listen to. And then finally, lean on others. Lean on others. Talk to members of school and national moot court teams. You know this, right? You probably get these emails as well. All of that information is listed and available to you. We really take pride at each of the law schools across the country who is competing. You either probably know someone that has competed at your school's competition or is competing nationally, or you know someone who knows someone. So you can actually ask questions to these people about this process and learn something from them. Now, just some tips for preparation. I'm actually going to throw all these up here on the screen really quickly. These are tips for preparation. So these are things to think about as you're translating your brief into your oral argument. The first one's really simple. It's your honor, right? Why am I putting this here? Well, when we're writing a brief, we're being deferential, we're being formal. We don't need to include your honor in that form of deference in our writing, but it's something we do want to start translating in our speech. When we're presenting an oral argument, when a judge asks a question, you're going to want to respond, yes, Your Honor, no, Your Honor, well, Your Honor, or this situation is different, Your Honor. You want to incorporate that language. So that's something to start thinking about, right? I'm not advocating you to write it in your notes, but as you're prepping, think about how you drafted this to be a formal piece of work, and you're going to include in your speech that formality. The next thing is take your time. This is going to be your first time drafting, taking your argument that you've written and drafting it into an oral argument breakdown, right? A roadmap, if you will. Take time with it. Play with different sections of an argument. Figure out what you want your roadmap to look like. Maybe tweak it a little bit, but then once you're comfortable, stick to it and say, this is going to be my roadmap. This next point is probably the thing that is most important as you're beginning to dive in and create your oral argument. This is not a speech. It's not a debate. It's a conversation. You will be interrupted, right? You're not going to have a moment where you can speak for 3.5 minutes and then there's a rebuttal. There's a rebuttal in oral arguments, but you need to be ready for judges to ask you questions, to make points about your flaws or your strengths, to respond to you. So think about that and really create a roadmap that's fluid, but that there's gaps in there. Now, I keep using the term roadmap, and it's something you're going to read about in some of the resources I've listed out on the PDF. When I say a roadmap, I basically mean an introductory statement that tells the judge and judges why you are right and why they need to rule in your favor. It also sets out the argument that you're going to speak. You should rule in in our favor, Your Honor, because this law does not contravene public policy. It has been a set state standard, and finally, not doing so would go against public policy or whatever, right? That's me speaking off the top of my head. That is your roadmap. It's where you very clearly state the goals of your position, and you really want to develop something that is strong, that has a good foundation, but has gaps where you can get questions, get feedback, and respond to them in kind. I have a question, counsel, right? That goes right into speech, not conversation. You need to start thinking about, as you draft your oral argument and put down your roadmap, what questions would I ask if I was a judge? What questions did I have when I was reading through this case law? One of the things that I did is when I was preparing for oral argument, I created my roadmap, I created my arguments listed out, and then I created a separate page that I didn't take up with me day of that had questions basically inserted at each section of my argument that I either had heard someone ask or that I wrote that I would ask. Getting ready to do that and having that sheet ready, that's a great tool you can give to a friend, a partner, a loved one who can help you practice. You can actually say, interrupt me here and ask me this, right? Know your facts, know your law, know your flaws. Know the law, know the facts, know your flaws. This is the key thing to think about with an oral argument. It's basically what you did with your trial brief and your trial memo, except now you need to think about it in the context of you speaking orally. So this is about being comfortable, knowing that you've written something very solid in the trial brief and all you're doing is adapting some of it, basically like taking something from the stage and adapting it into a film or a television show. There's a different process and a procedure. You're going to take that well-written stuff, that really good analysis, and you're just going to craft it into something that is really outstanding to listen to. And then practice, practice, practice. As you're building, right? As you're building out, as you're beginning to prep and you're creating this roadmap and you're getting started to begin to practice, go over it while you're doing it. Think about things, say things out loud. As you're writing and you're taking your brief and writing an oral argument, go ahead and say, this does not contravene public policy because this is a long-standing, socially accepted form of celebration, or whatever, right? Say your arguments out loud as you're drafting them from your brief to your roadmap and your paper. It's a really great way to understand it. Do I trip over words? Are there things here that I don't like how they're worded? Maybe I wrote something one way and I want it to be said a different way. So we've prepped. Now it's time to practice. Okay. This is the best advice that I have for first time practicing, right? The very first time after you've written this roadmap down, you've done some really good work with it. What I recommend is that you record yourself. Record yourself with no interruptions. Record yourself almost as if it is you giving a speech. This will actually help you capture ums, pauses, gaps, sections where you flub or you go over your speech, maybe sections where you realize you sped through because you really weren't confident about what you're saying. If you have that recording on day 1, you can then listen to that recording on day 10 or day 15 and hear your improvement. You can see the spots you've slowed down. You can see the spots you've beefed up. It's a really great way in any sort of public speaking to help you understand how far you've come. Create a list of questions. This is something we've talked about, right? Preempt questions by crafting a response. There are things when you read your brief or when you read the cases that you were like, okay, that doesn't look very good for me. If you remember saying that, you're probably going to be asked a question about it. If you read something and said, I don't agree with this, someone else is not going to agree with it too. That doesn't mean that you have to ignore it completely. No, you want to take that head on and say, I understand, Your Honor, that is a really good point, but here's why I'm correct. Craft a response. My friends and partner love to interrupt me all the time. I handed them a sheet and said, when I say the following buzzword, interrupt me and say, I don't know what I'm talking about and say this question. They love it. Even over Zoom, it's a really fun exercise. Watch your hands, watch your movements. As you have seen, if you've ever been to a session with me or you've watched me this last 10 minutes, I use hand movements a lot, right? Hand movements are fine in a lot of speaking. I think I use them too much and it's something that I'm working on. But when you're doing an oral argument, we really want to watch our hands. Law can be tense and it can be pretty dense to get through, right? We want to not give anybody any reason to not listen to the words that are coming out of our mouths. We want to watch our hand movements. We want to watch our swaying. I had a problem with pens. I would bring pens up and I would do the wand. I would Harry Potter, as my coach called it. Or I would do something that's even worse, which is this. Don't use your pen as a drumstick, right? Be free with your hands, but don't use them too much. Try not to pace, right? Make eye contact, but not like this. Jack Nicholson is the king of making you feel uncomfortable with his eyes, right? You want to stare at the judges, but you want to convey friendliness. You want to convey openness. You don't want them to wonder if you're thinking about why they're here, where they went to school, anything like that, right? You want to be comfortable and confident. You don't want to stare and make them uncomfortable. Practicing your argument, right? So I'll throw these out on the screen too. A lot of these are very, very simple. When you're practicing, right? After you've written and you're finishing up this, these are just a few little more tips. Watch your volume. You don't want to be whispering. I've had so many instances where I've had to ask counsel to speak up when I was judging. You don't want to have to do that. You really want to be firm with your voice. You might have a microphone, you might not, right? If we're back in a normal world, there are some instances where I didn't have a mic and there were some where I did. But I made sure my voice was able to be heard regardless. You want to speak directly. This is the big thing that we make mistakes on. And I say we because attorneys are taught, and even if you're a 1L here or a 3L, you know the canned answer. Well, is this blah, blah, blah? What about this? It depends, right? It depends. We often live in that vague area, but oral arguments isn't really time for vagary. There's no think or believe. Make a firm statement. Don't fight or don't try and fit hypotheticals in, right? Or out. Lean into them. Let me give you an example. Say your judge asks you a question and says, well, you know what, counsel, what if I said to my, person that we were going to do this and we lived out of state? If we lived out of state, how would that affect this in-state ruling? We have a tendency to, especially if we're nervous or if we didn't like that question, to say, well, that's not an issue here, Your Honor, right? We want to protect ourselves. That's not what you want to do. You actually want to lean into that and say, if you can, give a really good answer to that response, why that's not valid in this case, right? Or even better, if you don't know, just say, Your Honor, I'm not actually sure about that, but I would be happy to follow up with you about that. It kind of fits into this next point about circling back to questions. If you're asked a question, if you're given a hypothetical, the person asking was asking it for that moment for a very specific reason. It could be they just thought of it, which is most likely, but it could be that they wanted to hear this answer before you went on to another point. So you don't want to dodge or not take on hypotheticals, and you don't want to say to a judge, let me circle back to that, or I was just about to answer that. Answer that question. And then for bonus points, brownie points, you could say, as Your Honor rightly pointed out, this leads right into my next point. A really great way to kind of save face, answer the question, look really good. Now perfecting, this is where we go above and beyond being practiced. And this is about perfecting, being really ready to get more than get more than a good grade here, but be one of the best speakers in your class, right? Maybe some of you are like, yeah, I don't really care about this, but some of these are pretty easy, right? Have your roadmap memorized, your intro, your layout of your case, right? That's your intro, the issues, and why the judges are going to rule in your favor. This is pretty standard if you're thinking about competing at your school's competition or nationally. If you don't have your roadmap memorized, you're not going to do well. This is the part of the case that really symbolizes to the judges that you know what you're talking about, that you are a representative of this information, and that they can trust what you say. If you're able to speak with eye contact and not look at notes during your roadmap, during your intro, it sets the tone that you are the best advocate for these issues. You also want to make sure you're timed to perfection. Something that you might struggle with early on, right, is if you have a 10-minute time limit, you may go over at the beginning and be at 15. Practice, 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 get down to that 10 minutes. You're probably including an issue or a fact or some conclusion that you don't need. Think about what you can cut out. Think about maybe if it's an or a gap or a pause. Time yourself to perfection. Get practiced enough that you know what your routine approximation time is going to be. That way you can be comfortable day of, knowing that you probably might speed up a little bit, but still be right in your wheelhouse for your time. So this is the main thing when you're perfecting your argument, the last piece here before we talk about day of presentation. Are you confident moving forward? Are you confident saying to yourself, hey, I think I'm ready for this? Right? Often in law school, I had so many classmates, and I myself I would be like, I'm not ready for this. I'm not ready for this. I'm going to do terribly. Right? Think about it. Do you know your roadmap well enough that you're memorized? Are you ready for some of the toughest questions? And are you ready for the tougher questions? And are you ready for those that you don't know to say, Your Honor, that's a great question. If I can, I'll circle back to that. I'd love to submit a supplemental brief to answer that question. Just be confident. Once you've hit that space where you can say, I memorized to the best of my ability, I know I can answer some good questions, I think I'm going to do this well, that sets the tone mentally for the day of presentation. And if you don't know the judge, if you don't know, just be honest. This is really, 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 really important. I've already mentioned it like 2 or 3 times now, right? You don't know potentially who's going to be up there. You might not, right? I've had instances where one of the judges actually wrote a law that I was speaking on. You really don't want to guess and don't want to make something up. You want to say, I'm sure about this, I'm not sure about that. The canned answer, I've said it a few times, but I'll get it right perfectly here for you, is, you know what, Your Honor, that is a really good question. I actually don't have the answer to that right now, but if you would allow, I'd be happy to do some research on that and then submit a supplemental brief at a later date if you'd be okay with that. They're going to say yes. You don't have to do it in a practice or assignment setting, but that's what you would do in the real world, right? You're not going to guess. You're not going to lean into it. Maybe. Say you don't know and move on. Be confident that you gave the best response in that moment. All right, this is the easy stuff. We're almost done, right? This is presenting your argument. This is the day of presentation. And the reason that I wanted to give you this is that this is the thing that I wish somebody had just laid out for me. The first thing is relax. I know that that sounds crazy, but with law school, the number of times I went into exams, that I went into presentations terrified and left either, of course, feeling, good because it wasn't that bad, or feeling terrible. Really set your mind and set your body to being as saying, I've done the best I can. I've prepared as well as I can. I've asked myself the questions I think that they're going to ask. This is what it is, right? If you go in and you relax, you're going to feel much, much better than if you are not ready for what's coming. The next thing is drink water beforehand. What I mean by that is have a water bottle, right? Get some sips in, have a few sips. Don't bring it up with you and don't be chugging it right before the session, right? You want your voice to be ready. You want it to be alert. You want to have a little bit of, I know this sounds weird. My wife, future wife, is a voice actor, so we talk about voice a lot. You don't want your voice to be too covered in saliva. You want yourself to sound balanced and ready. So you want to drink water, but not too much. Again, day of, leave pens outside. If you have to, if you're a pen person, leave it outside. Seriously, it will help you so much if you don't have that up there so you're not tempted to pick it up. You're not going to be taking notes. You're not going to be taking notes during your oral argument. Even if somebody says, I'd like you to submit a supplemental brief to that, for this oral argument, you wouldn't have to do it anyway. In a real oral argument, you're going to remember what was asked. Put your hands on the podium, but don't lean, right? We're not doing this, right? We're not doing most interesting man in the world. You want your hands to be on the podium. You can even grip it a little bit, but you don't want to lean or push forward. You also don't want to death grip or lock your knees. Just be relaxed, be up there. Smile, be different, but don't be sarcastic. You can definitely smile, be friendly. This is kind of like a conversation, but more high stakes. You just want to be different. You want to be there and available to the judge. And whatever you do, don't be sarcastic or rude. People don't like rude people anyway. Judges definitely don't like rude people. So you don't want to go and be like, oh yeah, like that would ever happen. I know no one's going to do that, but I always mention it. And that's it. That's the breakdown of prepping, practicing, perfecting, and then presenting your oral argument. I know that this is a bit of information, but like I said, we've got this recorded, and I also have a list of PDF lists of helpful links that I'll send out as well that will be attached in the YouTube video below in the description. With that, I will say goodbye and turn off this recording.